The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Dylan J. Schlender presiding. All eyes for the Honorable Judge Schlender.
Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of The People vs. Star Trek, the motion picture. A 1979 sci-fi film about Admiral James T. Kirk, who must resume command of the USS Enterprise to counteract the threat of a massive, unknown craft threatening the planet Earth.
We're doing Star Trek again?
Oh, and we're going to keep doing Star Trek, baby.
We just
Let
did
the good
it last
times roll
week.
forever.
There's 7 more, man.
Oh, we're getting them all here, baby.
They
Now-
keep doing Star Trek. We'll keep doing Star Trek.
Hey, that's
those
right.
bastards.
Yeah, they want to fight? We gotta fight. All right. For those of you unfamiliar with our proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always in this courtroom, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Big Ben Haslar, you are appearing on behalf of the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
Thank you, Judge Unit, Defense Unit, Bailiff Unit, Jury Units. Imagine, if you will, gathering your family together to watch the adventures of Captain James Kirk and the crew of the Enterprise. They come across a space cloud that's actually a space probe tasked with assembling information to destroy everything and it destroys everything in its wake. The probe beams on the Enterprise and communicates with everyone in terms of Kirk Unit, Spock Unit, and the like. But this is not Star Trek the Motion Picture. This is the very meh-received second season episode, The Changeling. So why, oh why, would they take an episode that was neither terrible nor great and tack an extra hour's worth of special effects on it and call it a movie? The movie should come with the disclaimer attached, warning, do not watch with headache, may cause volatile reactions and insanity in humans. Try sitting through Pager, Kirk Unit, please supply information. Pager, disclose the information. Malfunction with even a non-pounding headache, and you're still likely to get annoyed. It's been a well-known debate in nerddom if the odd-numbered Star Trek films are bad and the even numbers are good. With the first one, it's rarely brought in defense of the odd-numbered ones. In fact, it's even a debate which one of these is worse, this or the Shatner-tastic Star Trek V. As Philip J. Fry says, the films average out to be really good. But we in the prosecution will endeavor to prove that this is the film that pulls down that average from the glory that is 2, 4, and 6. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haslar. Appearing on behalf of the defense is Mr. Scott Weitz. Please present your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor, and fellow units. You can suck my unit. That's not.
Oh, no! Order in the court right now!
You call it now, Judge?
I don't have a gavel big enough for this. My goodness.
Well, take that up with your doctor. I'm sorry. Or your mother and dad. I don't know which. Anyway, I will concede that we all know that Star Trek the Motion Picture is an overly long, bloated film in most respects. Ostensibly, it's the Excelsior of the Star Trek film franchise. But it's far from the worst entry in the series. It still earns many merits as a standalone epic science fiction film that started the feature franchise that paved the way for a dozen feature films and 10 more TV series that followed. That is not usually the hallmark of a failure or a bad film. It may not be the greatest of Star Trek films, but we know it's far from the worst. And without Star Trek the Motion Picture, the Star Trek entire Googleplex of pop culture may well have ended in just the endless syndication of 79 episodes, leaving Gene Roddenberry's unique vision of the future as a relic of the past. And Star Trek the Motion Picture alone prevented that alternate universe from happening.
Thank you, Mr. Weitz. Mr. Haslar, you may proceed with your first exhibit.
This film is easily 1/3 just the camera circling around ships and space stations. At the beginning, Kirk beams onto the space station from Earth just so they can ride the shuttlecraft around the Enterprise for, and I clocked it, 5 full minutes. The camera closes in on Kirk, getting misty 3 or 4 times. Then they approach the shuttle bay, and you think your torture is over, but no, they decide to keep going along the dock somewhere else along the side. And then we have to essentially watch this again when the Enterprise is leaving that docking that it was built in, and it crawls out of its construction frame. This just goes on forever. There's like 10 minutes of nothing but the Enterprise just turning lights on. The warp sequence is also one that just goes on forever, and that's they hit warp, and we hear everyone go, "No, belay that phaser order," and this doesn't have any relation to the plot whatsoever. It's just stretching everything out, because the real plot, as I mentioned in my opening statement, was really just an hour long. It does show that Kirk doesn't understand the ship anymore, but Decker's explanation of the phasers being routed through the engine is also sort of a head scratcher, because I know my car has the speedometer routed through the mirror adjuster. Flying through V'ger also takes forever and is repeated by both the Enterprise entering V'ger and then Spock entering it to see all these planets and stuff that V'ger, I guess, is storing holographically within itself. I don't know how it could be quite that big to have multiple planets within it, but there it is. And then V'ger has a whole... Oh, sorry. I'll pass these boys to the defense.
Oh, okay. Then, Mr. Weitz, do we spend too much time watching people travel on ships?
Well, you might as well throw out the entire Star Trek franchise if that's your question.
But you can establish it within like 10 seconds. About,
as it turns out, it's a 5-year mission, not a 5-year meeting.
There's a thing called editing, though, to get pace going.
I understand. I would say this in 2 parts. The practical part is Paramount insisted that Star Trek the Motion Picture be epic. 1, because it was birthed from a TV show, which never got to be epic. 2, by the time it went into production, both Star Wars and Close Encounters had already hit theaters and blown up box office records. So, being Gene Roddenberry, and Paramount said, we don't want to do a silly space opera, shoot 'em up like Star Wars. We want to do serious science fiction. And the focus on this being a realistic starship that has 400 crew members on it that is going across the galaxy, they spent a lot of time on making the Enterprise big for fans. It was totally fan service, and I was there at the time because I'm old. And I know that Star Trek fans ate that up, because finally the Enterprise did not fit on your 19-inch screen. It was gigantic. Also, because of Paramount's directive, Douglas Trumbull, who unfortunately we just recently lost, was following Kubrick's example of making these long visual effects sequences that were awe-inspiring without talking. And if you want to say what's too much in Star Trek the Motion Picture, are you going to argue that is not enough talking and too much images, or vice versa? And what Douglas Trumbull was doing was trying to give literally the film a scale that Star Trek itself never had. And I agree. First of all, to Dylan's point, Jerry Goldsmith's track for the Enterprise is actually 6 minutes long. So It's even longer than that. But it was very...
Mr. Weitz, I'd just like to point out that I'm the judge and you're going up against Ben tonight.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
This whole courtroom's out of order.
Ben who? No. Is Ben here?
There's a segment where like 20...
OG Star Trek fans in 1979 that got to just ogle, their beautiful girlfriend, the Enterprise. It didn't seem that long. In retrospect, it does today, but I could say that about a lot of films made 40 years ago as well.
What I think you addressed the point quite well there, Mr. Weitz. I'll kick it back to you, Big Ben.
Yeah, I mean, I think that 20 minutes and the only plot point is that the Enterprise went inside V'ger and parked is a bit too long. But anyway, Spock is sitting there
Apparently
at the
used to
beginning of the
parking and
film
things a lot shorter time span, but that's your problem.
in real time. So Spock's about to receive this symbol of logic that looks like a preschool art project, but he can't due to V'ger somehow calling his human blood, and he feels compelled to investigate. This is never answered, why V'ger is somehow able to telepathically communicate with a half-human, half-Vulcan across space. You can answer that on your time, Defender. V'ger, or the machine planet that it lands on, knows how to read the English lettering on this satellite, because it was at one time Voyager, but it's got, that very cliche thing where Kirk gets to like move the dust around and, oh no, it's Voyager, not V'ger. But that again is never answered, like why it's not unaware of that it's like just dust on itself, or that the machine planet that beefed it up couldn't, like, oh hey wait, there's actually more lettering here. And when they're in the thing, Spock just figures out that there must have been this machine planet, by the way. There's really nothing else to go on as far as, the satellite couldn't have done it itself. Oh, sure, machine planet. The whole reason this is here, I think, is like for William Shatner to be able to use it in The Return. He said the Borg was this machine planet that brought Kirk back. So maybe they're just playing an extreme long game here. But then V'ger somehow merges with Decker, and then we don't really know what happens. This new life form is created. It disappears forever because the movie's over. And thank God, by the way.
Okay, Mr. Weitz, can you address any of these V'ger complaints? Should they have known it was Voyager? What's up with the new life form? Was it the Borg?
I don't believe so, because the Borg, a much later invention, of course, but seem to have drastically different motivations than finding a fellow robot and sending it off to find itself in the galaxy. That's a very Star Trek human exploration notion of what space is about, not conquering territories, which more classic Star Trek was about. And this film was definitely avoiding. There's not even conflict between the Vulcans and the Federation in this movie, which is one of the most basic building blocks of classic Star Trek. So clearly the focus is shifted in intent. To correct some of the prosecutor's points, I guess, he only watched parts of the movie because it was too long for him.
It was.
Going back specifically for V'ger, I have wormhole corrections as well. But the movie makes clear that the machine planet race, whatever they were, found V'ger, which was sent out to explore and gain knowledge on its journey, and they built that entire massive thing around it so it could fulfill its function, because they feel robots should do that because they're doing it themselves. And so the parallel between why does Spock sense V'ger on Vulcan? Why does he know about it? The film deliberately makes a plot connection between V'ger's quest to discover what its true meaning is. At the same time, Spock is going through the same thing in his life. That's why he's failing the Colinar, because his answer to why am I here? What am I doing here? What is my purpose? As the Vulcan leader says, can't be found on Vulcan at this point. Spock needs to go find that answer elsewhere. And because he is in the same mindset, in the same life journey as V'ger, the plot connects those two together. A Vulcan being the obvious one who has other, he can pinch neck people and all these other things. They've already given the character special abilities that are above humans. So of course he is the one who's going to start receiving signals from V'ger, because he's going through the same thing. They're both asking the same questions in the universe, and that's why the two are obviously tied together in storytelling. I thought the movie made that pretty clear.
No, it did from a storytelling perspective, but from a universal perspective, being, there's not a story being played, but these characters are part of a universe. How would Spock know to go search this thing? How did V'ger reach Spock in order for him to fail his Kolinahr test?
Because V'ger has been turned into, in the original measurements, an 82 AU wide space phenomenon. That's 82 times the distance between the Earth and the Sun. It's a massively powered thing, 12th power, whatever that means, but it impresses Sulu, so it must be important. On the scale of imaginary Star Trek measurements, 12 power is pretty damn big. But it's clearly broadcasting. And why is it heading to Earth? Because it knows that's where its creator is. And Spock just intercepts it because he's on the Enterprise. But something of that magnitude has been calling out from across the galaxy, waiting for its maker to answer. And it's not until it gets closer to Earth that we can even intercept its signal, because it's radio. It's so friggin' weak. But whatever, the whole purpose of V'ger at that point is to call out and make contact with someone. Why is Spock?
I agree, but his telepathic abilities are Vulcan, not human.
I don't see how that makes any sense. Who cares?
I don't either.
Race he is? No, who cares what race he is? The point is he's telepathic. He senses things that.
But why aren't the other Vulcans like, oh wow, there's a thing out there?
Right, and someone is calling, and he's the first one to answer the phone because he's the first one to hear it ringing. That's the simple.
Not the
logic.
other Vulcans that are on the test giving him the Kolinahr test, though. Not those elders.
They have passed the Kolinahr and have dropped all those emotional things and moved on to a purely logical thing. The whole point of V'ger in the end of the movie, the third act that they invented while they were making the movie because no one could figure out, was how do you solve the problem of V'ger? By uniting the mechanical with the human. He's doing the same thing, just telepathically with communication. He is the person who is seeking something, and he hears the other seeker who's calling him because they're on the same path. He's the only character in the film who is in that state of mind, and by the end, he does. He says, I don't need the Kolinahr anymore. I've already gone through this.
All right, I think you made your point there, Mr. Weitz, on Spock. Gave the jury a lot to chew on there. Mr. Haslar, would you like to proceed with the further point?
The costuming. Sometimes it looks okay, but other times it's just very 70s with its off-brown jumpsuits and Kirk's short-sleeve chest hair exposing captaining shirt and Aaliyah's towel robe and the plastic transmitter watches. The set is also very 70s with its recreation room having this sunken living room with orange carpeting, and the bridge has the same cluster of lights as a control panel that apparently means something to Spock. This was in the show too, but back when they were doing the show, they had a very limited budget and they expanded everything else in the Enterprise, yet kept this very cheap looking control panel. They didn't think beyond the time that they lived. When you're doing something that's set in the future, you make everything different, but they couldn't think beyond that. They made everything look like sort of a spacey version of the 70s. And just how much money did they dump into the V'ger effects before they realized, oh shoot, we have to make the rest of the movie too. So yeah, we'll just cut it on costuming and all this other stuff. How is the Enterprise the only ship near Earth where Starfleet headquarters is? And why does McCoy, he hates Starfleet. He has nothing but contempt for technology. He's a bit racist towards every alien species that he ever comes across. Why is this dude here? I'm just asking, why'd they draft him? And also, this is a movie to not do the Shatner drinking game with, because he is almost at his Shatnerist. If you took a shot every time he goes, Spock, you'd be plastered within an hour. The prosecution rests.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haslar. Mr. Weitz, you may now proceed with your case.
Thank you. Star Trek costuming in this film, I concede.
Probably a good move.
It's an unfortunate. As you mentioned, the orange shag carpet and everything. It's an unfortunate artifact of 1978 that this film was produced in, and there were tons of just to go backstage. This is not. I still can see the point, but it's worth remembering that a lot of these sets, including the bridge, the Enterprise, and everything, had to be rebuilt for the film because they originally started building it all for the Phase 2 TV series. And so basically, the original budget for Star Trek the motion picture was $8 million, and in the end it cost $46 million. So you can see what happened. But it was inheriting a TV series design, and how a lot of it had to be rebuilt, specifically the bridge, because they were shooting this in widescreen, and the pieces of the bridge didn't fit, which is why Chekhov has this weird weapons console over on the fucking side over there. It's it doesn't make any sense, and it's a horrible looking bridge. I hate the way it's.
The Defender knows more about why this sucks than I do.
I have to, I have to be fair. It's like this part is indefensible, but it's because Paramount could not figure out how to do this, launched a TV series, shut it down, and said, no, we're making this a motion picture, and had to rebuild it all. I learned a trivia fact about costuming. They were so desperate that there are several people in the large gathering in the rec hall or whatever it was, because a spaceship exploring the galaxy needs a rec hall for dances and things. Anyway, they were reusing cloth from the 10 Commandments in 1956 that Paramount had stacked in bulk.
I did read that.
Yeah, because it's like, well, that's cheap. We already own it. So, the design aesthetics of that, I think the Enterprise redesign looks really good, but the costuming is terrible. As we can say safely now in the year 2022, lounge pajamas are not the Starfleet wear of the future that that they anticipated. They look horrible, and God love him. First of all, William Shatner's like 48 in this, which is he's 90 now. So just imagine that. But they had to put him in a girdle to make his outfit look good on him. Not that he was wildly out of shape. It's a terrible design. So I agree. Costuming sucks. And
Mr. Weitz, I would implore you to say something positive about the movie, though.
Okay. Once again, I'll correct the prosecution who asked, why is McCoy on this ship? Again, the plot makes it pretty clear that Admiral Naguma drafted him through some weird unused thing in Star Trek.
That's true, but I don't know why he joined Starfleet in the first place.
But clearly, the point was, and if you look at this, going back to the TV show, apparently Admiral Naguma's motivation was, I need the best, most experienced crew I have to go save Earth. And which is why they drafted McCoy, and why that whole crew had been assembled. They replaced the science officer, all of this stuff is to get, it's to get the band back together. It makes sense in Star Trek lore. And if you say that the Enterprise's original 5-year mission was successful, there's a reason why Kirk is admiral at this point. But he says, no, don't sit at a desk. I need you on the bridge of this thing, regardless of what Will Decker thinks. Because you're the one who's figured all this shit out. And maybe there's some green skin aliens you can fall in love with at the same time.
Hell yeah.
I think it clearly McCoy doesn't
would have made this movie better, by the way.
But
Noted.
his and I would agree that as Dr. McCoy, his character isn't as fully used, but you can say that about almost the rest of them too, and which is an issue with the script. But,
again, Mr. Weitz, you were defending the movie.
I know, but my point is this: the prosecutor made an inane point of why is McCoy here. The movie makes very clear why he's there, because he is a member of this crew. The whole point of making Star Trek the motion picture is to get the band back together, and you can't do that without McCoy. He's just, he's too much of a fan favorite, and originally in the series, he's a talking foil for Kirk, and that is his purpose in this character ensemble within the story, is to be the no man to Kirk, who just says yes, yes, yes. And McCoy says, wait a minute, think about it. There's other implications. And he makes Kirk stop for a second and, think about the larger picture, which makes him a better captain. But he's a better captain because McCoy is there, and McCoy is the only character who serves that function. Certainly Spock never does it.
All right, I think that's a very fair point. Is there anything else you'd like to bring up in defense of the film, Mr. Weitz?
In defense.
Sure. Well, I think that a lot of fans today wouldn't know how much Star Trek predates Star Wars, who modern day fans think started all of this. And I think the value of Star Trek the Motion Picture is it was practically forced upon Paramount by the fan base, who were mad that the series got canceled 7 years before anyway. And it represents a fan-based film franchise that really didn't exist before this. It was a cultural step in cult fans of a TV show telling a movie studio, no, you have to go make a $50 million film because we insist on it and you have to do it right. That hadn't happened before, and that happened with Star Trek before Star Wars was even filmed. It's a measure of cultural measure that was happening at the same time we were about to launch the space shuttle, and which would have been, the first working reusable spaceship that humankind had created in the mold of what would lead to something like Star Trek. So it has cultural relevance in a bunch of ways that go beyond, pajama clothes.
Mr. Haslar, would you like to respond to the cultural implications of the motion picture?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a way to defend it since we're apparently switching sides. It is interesting, the place that it sits in cinematic history, but that doesn't make it good. It doesn't make it good from a plot perspective, which is what the most important thing is when we're deciding whether a movie is good or bad.
Oh, is that what we're deciding?
Yes.
I didn't get that memo.
Mr. Weitz, we're not here to decide if it's a Christmas movie. Only talk about what happens
on the bridge, nothing else. I understand. All right. Then I will skip to the part that is most obviously talked about even today with Star Trek Motion Picture are the special effects. They were excellent. They were groundbreaking. They were the quality and complexity of them were well beyond anything in Star Wars, Close Encounters, perhaps certainly rivaled by 2001, but not in the time it took to make them. And they did it all with analog special effects technology. There's nothing digital about this. There's so much not digital about Star Trek the Motion Picture that all the video screens you see on the bridge are 16 millimeter films running in loops. They didn't even have TV screens to run video on. That's how prehistoric the special effects state of the art was at the time this was made in 1978. And as overblown as the flyby is, it changed how the Enterprise was viewed in terms of the graduating from TV to film, which today doesn't seem significant, but that was a huge selling point in 1979. Is this is not a TV show anymore. This doesn't fit on your TV screen. It's so big it doesn't fit on your movie screen. If you want to say there's too much, then talk to the editor. But I think you really can't complain about the quality if you just look at how these shots were executed, how the miniature of the V'ger ship, which you never really get to see in one shot. The miniature, if you want to call it that, was 68 feet long. So it was built. Awesome. It was built in stages so they could start filming the beginning entrance to V'ger at one end of the model while they were building all the other end to film later. It was that big. You don't see that. It is historic, the things they did to make those visual effects happen. And again,
and what lucky Trekkie has that in his gymnasium? I'm just curious.
I'm sure it was destroyed because who could store it? Certainly, Paramount was not going to pay to store that forever, which is how most movie props and sets die. Is they're just in the way now. But anyway, I think if you're only talking about the story of Jim Kirk, like the prosecutor says, none of this matters. If you're talking about why this isn't a bad film and why it's important, then the groundbreaking visual effects that were made for Star Trek the Motion Picture are still relevant today, and all the people who made them are still relevant today in the industry. You can't say that about a lot of films that were made 40 years ago.
All right. Would you like to rest there, Mr. Weitz? Or if you have anything else to bring up,
I do have. I'll make a couple of quick points.
Go for it.
I'm surprised it hasn't come up yet, but in specifics, yes, Star Trek: The Motion Picture seemed long. It seemed overly long. An editor could cut things out and make it happen. But again, I want to compare that to what we are now used to today. The theatrical release of the motion picture was 2 hours and 12 minutes. That is not an overly long movie. The pacing may have a problem, but people say the movie's too long isn't really the answer.
It felt long. Yes.
Well, that's pacing. That's not the length of the movie. I'm saying.
Agreed. I concede.
But compared to that, anyone who sat through Christopher Nolan's Tenet, did that time go by fast? That was 2 hours and 30 minutes.
Didn't
that
time
one
go
had so much
backwards?
plot, though. There was so much you had to pay attention to.
Right. And let's not forget our friend Denis Villeneuve. Dune is 2 hours and 35 minutes. Blade Runner 2049 was 2 hours and 44 minutes. That's over a half an hour longer than Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
But again, do they feel that? You know, the pacing in those films, like, there's so much to pay attention to there. You're never
I would
sitting there just watching.
Blade Runner is a movie that zips along at a fast clip. Now that's obviously subject to everyone's opinion. I'm just saying, if one of your complaints is running time, I say that argument doesn't hold up because not a long running time.
Are you bored in Blade Runner 2049?
I fell asleep in it. And I'm a Blade Runner fan because the middle of the movie sags like an upside down camel.
Okay, let's move along for Blade Runner. It's not on trial yet.
No, but I'm talking about running.
Your point is well taken, though, Mr.
Yes, Robert Wise, great director, probably not the optimal choice for this film, but again, this is Paramount making a movie that stands out amongst its competitors in 1979. And Star Trek, true to its nature, was much more about exploring ideas of science fiction, about the future of humanity, not just about battles of spaceships. And I think that that's very much a concept of its time. It is, in its context, is appropriate. Its focus is a little imbalanced, but it's definitely the right focus for Star Trek to not become Star Wars, and it didn't. And it set up everything of Star Trek that has followed by reinforcing those values into a new, burgeoning franchise that has indeed separated itself since then. And without the decisions that were made for Star Trek: The Motion Picture, none of that would have happened. And I think that it's crucial that it does that, though it's not by any means a perfect film. The other merit, I think, is undeniable is Jerry Goldsmith's soundtrack score. It's one of his most impressive. It's the theme, which a lot of fans would say, why aren't you using the old theme from the TV show? I don't remember anyone complaining about that because his score was so good and dynamic, and it fit the weirdness of the V'ger story. And it, I would hesitate to say that his score is worth the movie alone, but I think his score was absolutely critical to selling the story that it was supporting. And it's a very good thing that Star Trek: The Motion Picture came along for Goldsmith to create that. And, it was so impactful that nearly 10 years later, Roddenberry used the exact same score to launch Star Trek: The Next Generation, which I think shows what a positive reflection that has back on the film.
All right. Any comment on the score, Mr. Haslar?
No, he was nice enough to concede my point, so I'll concede his. The score is brilliant, and it does use like little musical cues from the original theme, so that's also sort of a nice nod there. So yeah, no objection there.
I like that.
Just one note of trivia on that point that you wisely brought up. I believe I read that the original Star Trek theme is used 3 times in the motion picture, and every time it's when Kirk is making a captain's log entry.
Oh yeah, I did notice the
Which
first
is
one. I
a
didn't notice it
direct
continued
callback
that.
to the original series, and it's not meant for nostalgia. It's meant for that's Kirk's theme.
All right. Would you like to rest your case there, then, Mr. Weitz?
Just add a very quick note, Your
Very
Honor.
quick. Sure.
Yes. A lot of people think back unknowing and say, "Oh, motion picture was a flop." It wasn't a flop. At the time it was the most expensive picture made until Superman came along. But it earned roughly 3 times its $46 million budget. That's not a failure. It wasn't as big as Star Wars, but nothing was. Jaws wasn't as big as Star Wars. If you want to say Jaws a failure because it didn't earn as much as Star Trek, go help yourself. But I'm just saying, anyone who wanted to make a complaint about that it wasn't a financial success, that also isn't true.
Would you like to call it there, Mr. Weitz?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Both sides. Yeah, that's quite all right. We're all drinking here at the Reels of Justice. It's part of the fun.
I didn't know there was a choice.
There isn't. So both sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Mr. Haslar, you may begin.
Jurors, I submit to you the motion picture paradox. The motion picture must be created in order to establish a Star Trek film franchise, but a film must also be denoted as bad so that the creators can learn from their mistakes. If the motion picture blunders, then the shift to the Wrath of Khan cannot be made for a quarter of the budget and be nearly 4 times as good. As it sits within the continuity of Star Trek, it will clearly be on its own, an odd man out, as it were. From the uniforms they were using that were never recycled, to this all-powerful machine that achieves human sentence and never disappears, and then disappears, one would have to do a whole lot of connecting of dots to go from the original series to the films that follow. But exist it must, jurors, and be found bad, it too must also be found. The needs of the better Star Trek films outweigh the needs of the motion picture. It is only logical.
All right, thank you. Mr. Weitz, you may present your closing argument.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor. I think, once again, the prosecutor makes some strangely selective points about the film. I think the most true Star Trek notion in the film is literally stated in the ending, contrary to what the prosecutor just stated, that V'Ger did not simply disappear out of the Star Trek franchise. As stated in the film, once it joined with its human creator, it evolved to a different plane of existence to explore all the illogical things that a machine could not imagine. That is why it doesn't appear in Star Trek again, not because it was stupid and it failed, people didn't like it, is because in the story, it evolved to its next higher being, which is very much the central core of Star Trek mythology, is how can we be better than who we are, but our own imperfections allow us to strive to be better than who we are. The two are necessary. Indeed, it's not a perfect film, but it's striving for better things, and it sets up that striving to achieve greater storytelling, greater filmmaking, greater mythology, by the end of it to say, this is the mission of these films, not just to crank out sequels, compared to a lot of bottle episode stories like Wrath of Khan or others. This film alone leaves that open-ended journey ahead of us as human beings, as well as film audiences. And it's important for everything that followed, if you like anything that followed.
All right. Thank you both. Members of the jury, Mr. Robb Maynard, Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, and Mr. Dammit Jim, why is any object we don't understand always called Ryan Luis Rodriguez? You have all heard the facts concerning this case.
Why is that?
It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation holodeck simulation to render your verdict.
People come up to me all the time saying how much I remind them of a Star Trek character, and I agree. I'm 100% Nurse Chapel.
All right, guys. So Star Trek again, Ryan. I don't know how we talked him into this. We're paying for all those Bond movies you wanted to do.
Yeah, those movies I really was dying to do.
Oh man, the whole show could be Star Trek and Bond. That would be awesome.
That would be great.
I would quit.
We would finally lose Ryan.
So Ryan, what do you think about this movie?
So this movie is a strange dichotomy in that it's very much two different things happening at the same time. You have the Douglas Trumbull effects, which are astounding, amazing, still hold up to this day. But then you also have what is a good portion of the runtime is just people in hideous beige jumpsuits watching television. So it's a confounding film, and I understand why it's hated as much as it is. But at the same time, I mean, as someone who's not a traditional Star Trek fan, I find a lot to enjoy about it, and I wouldn't necessarily call it good, but I have value in it, if that makes sense.
So am I the only one who thinks
that.
It's good? Like, I liked it.
No, I'm not saying it's bad.
I ultimately ended up really liking it a lot. Like, I see the points that are made. It's really, really slow paced, but I don't think that slow pace is necessarily bad if it serves some function. And I think that the whole floating in space, that's slow to me. That's something that would happen slowly. So I don't mind a slow paced space sci-fi film. We probably do spend a little too long on the ship, but I agreed with Scott that it's all about presenting this huge thing in scale and showing the massive scale of this that had never been shown on the screen before. You know, they didn't know they were going to get to make another movie. They could have thought this is the only time we're going to show this big epic thing on
it's go big or go home.
Yeah, on widescreen, and I think they kind of get in awe of the enormity of it. I think that's what it's all about.
Like Scott said, Paramount wanted this to be an effects movie, right? Like that was the focus, that was the drive. I think the fan service cuts both ways, though, right? So you have the ship, we get to see it in all of its glory, fan service check there. But where they completely fumble is the characterization. We lose everything about the original series because all the characters are really flat and barely get to emote or do anything that makes their characters, so much fun to watch, especially when you compare it to the movies that would come after, especially if you compare it to something like The Voyage Home, which doesn't even have the Enterprise in it, so I think that's very interesting that you say, oh, we spent all this time on the Enterprise and we love it, and then the most successful movie doesn't even have the Enterprise in it because it's all about the characters, and that's what people love about the original series. That said, though, everyone knows where I come down on Star Trek. I freaking love it. You could say there's bad movies, like a bad movie for Star Trek, but I'll take your worst Star Trek movie over so much other stuff. Like I can't get to guilty on this one. I think there's just too much going on. I think the effects are great. I love, like the whole V'ger thing deal. I don't like Spock ripping off 2001: A Space Odyssey. I have my quibbles with this, but you know what the trouble with quibbles is?
You made that joke last week.
Oh, that is last week?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, then everyone knows where I'm coming down on this, so I'll let you two hash it out.
See, I love V'ger. I like V'ger. It feels very original series Star Trek to me because it's not a villain.
Well, because it's ripped off an original series episode, like Ben said. That's
but
why.
It's not a villain. It's a misunderstood, entity. With its own purposes. So it's not villainous. It's not like Khan, right? Where it's a very specifically kind of cartoony villain. It's simply a misunderstood thing that's happened upon within exploration. So I really like that too. And yeah, I loved all the miniatures and I loved all the music. Ryan, which way are you leaning?
Well, I mean, I would, if we're just talking about my own feelings of the movie, it's a not guilty, but Ben put up a damn good case, so I'm going to go guilty.
Yeah, that's fair. After seeing it, I can understand what people don't like about it. That I can understand they don't like the slow pace. But that's what the movie is, and that's clearly what it wants to be. And if you're not along for the ride, I mean, that's your problem, but it's not the movie's problem. So I'm going not guilty. So let's get out there then and tell that very handsome judge.
Yes, let's. Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of The People versus Star Trek, the motion picture, we find the defendant not guilty of being a bad movie.
Boo! Wait, no, yay!
Yay. This is a great movie. Boo.
No, it is great. The verdict is so rendered. Star Trek the Motion Picture is free to go, but I would like to remind William Shatner that we will see him again for Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. Court is adjourned.
No!
Oh, baby, we're going to watch all of them, Ryan. That is just going to be something that happens.
No. This is Mumbly Mumblerson reporting to you from outside the Reels of Justice. Big Ben Haslar, would you care to share your thoughts on the jury's verdict?
Well, relieved, I guess, Mumbly. I'm a Star Trek fan, and if this is considered not guilty, then that should mean that all of them are not guilty, except for Nemesis, I guess, for some reason. So, yeah, neat.
Yeah, okay, whatever. And here comes Scott Weitz. Excuse me, can we get a word on how you feel about the jury's verdict?
Yes, I think the jury made a wise verdict. Clearly,
A Robert Wise verdict.
Exactly.
Boo! Get out of here,
wow. Reels of punishment is what this is like. And I doff my cap to the prosecutor, Bill. What was his name?
Oh,
Ben.
jeez.
Steve.
You're brutal, Scott. You're brutal.
That, he presented an excellent case, and I said from the beginning that you could flip-flop easily on either side of prosecution or defense and be right 100% of the time. You did a great job, and I think the verdict is just and also accurate in pointing out how it could have gone either way.
Thanks, I guess. That's all we have from the courthouse today. Let's go back to the studio for post-trial analysis.
All right, more Star Trek. We've got, 12 more movies to go? Let's do them, baby.
I do have to correct Ben.
No, good job, man. You know
this
more
was
about
better
this
than
film than I
Insurrection.
do.
This was better than Insurrection.
No, it wasn't.
I disagree.
It's
Yes,
very
it
nice
was.
to
Oh,
say
it totally
that,
was. Yeah,
Thank
way
you.
more,
No,
way more.
no,
Better
it's
than
not.
Insurrection.
Yes.
Not even close.
Absolutely.
Oh, my goodness.
Another
Not
movie's going to
even.
have all. It's better than all the reboot trilogy too. All that,
Yes, I will say that.
that's all true. So
All I can say is, if you guys plan on asking me to defend Star Trek V, just lose my email now. No, I won't do it. I refuse to do it.
Will you prosecute it? Will you be back to prosecute?
A blind rubber duck could prosecute Star Trek V and win the case. It's
Oh, my God.
It's such. I literally have seen it once in my lifetime in the theater. I'll never get that time running back. I literally don't remember what it's about. All I remember is the ending answered every Star Trek fan's dreams that three old men sit around by a campfire and sing "Row, row, row your boat." That is Star Trek to me. I don't know how, other than, we let Leonard direct a couple of these. We got to let Bill direct one of these. I forget who wrote it, but it's just.
I think
Sulu.
Shatner did.
I think
Oh,
it's
God,
it's
right.
just. I mean, I didn't want to harp on it because it's sort of a metagaming thing. But if anyone who thinks Star Trek: The Motion Picture is a bad film just needs to go try and start watching Star Trek V again, and you'll see what a bad Star Trek film is. The motion picture has tons of flaws, and I admitted to I did some of
You did my work for me. You really did.
but because you have to.
And I still lost.
It's like if you talk about the special effects, to be fair, you have to talk about there's too much of them. It's a directive from the studio that made it that way, and one of the reasons that I learned in researching just the background and the development of this, which I really didn't know at the time, is how dry and how much about the V'ger mystery and science fiction the script was, and how none of it was about the characters they were all asked to come back and play, to the point where they were rewriting scenes. Who was it? But anyway, I know. Leonard Nimoy was rewriting a lot of his stuff, just trying to make this relevant to the characters, not necessarily Spock stuff, but just crew stuff. And,
they lost so much of the characters in the heart from the show. That was the double-edged sword of everything.
The
Unfortunately,
development of this from being a TV series to a film had 15, 20 writers. Philip Cobb was going to direct at one point. He wouldn't agree with Roddenberry, so that fell apart. It was just it's the definition of development hell. And when they started shooting, they still didn't have a third act because no one could figure out what to do. And the cast,
just copy the episode.
The cast was so busy rewriting their parts, trying to get some of the old Star Trek in, that neither Robert Wise, who didn't know the series at all, I think that was a big mistake. They showed him like 10 episodes, like, here's what Star Trek's about. And he's like, okay. But
sounds like Ryan.
the Nimoy and the cast and everyone else, other writers, were submitting so many rewrites. The new pages that the crew would get every day were timed with an hour stamp. They had new versions within hours of the same day that were rewrites, not just this is from the 25th.
Saying, don't memorize this. Don't bother memorizing it.
This is from the 25th. This is the 11 a.m. rewrite, not the 10 a.m. rewrite. And that just shows you what trouble this was in. And the biggest flaw is that you're reviving Star Trek without all the parts that people love about Star Trek. Yes, they love science fiction, but it was the crew going through those battles, those mysteries, the whatever else. It was the interaction of the crew. And clearly, when they went to make Star Trek 2, they said, all right, we're turning dial the opposite way. And of course it was better received. I was surprised that it didn't make more money than motion picture, but it's a way better film because it's about Star Trek characters to the point where even the villain is a recall from a villain in the original series. And it's like, it's all about the people. And it just feels much better. It's a much more engaging story. It doesn't say nearly as much about Roddenberry's vision of Star Trek, but by this point in the films, I think Paramount kind of didn't care about that anymore. It's like,
and they basically kicked Roddenberry off the film.
You guys cannot talk about Star Trek for the rest of the night. You've talked about Sar Trek enough. Scott, let's talk about what you're up to. What has been keeping you busy?
Reviewing in minute detail the entire filmology of Star Trek. That's been
let's talk about that.
I am outside of these shenanigans. I am developing a screenplay with a friend of mine currently. I am still writing scripts for my radio drama Dread of Night Radio Theater. If we can ever safely get back into a studio to record them together, new episodes will happen. But since COVID, that's been an impossibility. But I'm still trying to get new episodes of Dread Night completed and released, and they're being written. I can't say any details, but I have some interesting lines to some certain actors that would be great to have on the show if it all works out. My problem right now is I can't tell them when we can do the show. But hopefully that will clear up this summer, and those are the kind of things I'm busy with.
All right, good. Now, we always ask for recommendations from our guests for movies that you think our listeners should check out. So what is a recommendation that you have for us?
This is a recommendation based on a movie that I purchased and received this week. It is not a new film. It is the original Nightmare Alley, starring Tyrone Power.
From the 40s?
And from the 40s, yes.
46.
I had seen and enjoyed Guillermo's recent film of it. Thought it was very good. I'd never seen the original. I knew that it was based on a novel, which I've also never read, and I want to do that next. But I'd never seen the original film, and so I watched it this week, and it's different. It's very much a film of its time, but it doesn't get as dark and violent as Guillermo's version.
Yeah.
But there's still some twisted, carny stuff going on in there that must have been, a little bit shocking and unsettling for its audience, like Guillermo's is today. And the film holds up really well. It doesn't pull as many punches as you think it would, given its era. And I've never been a huge Tyrone Power fan, but I thought he did an excellent job and is very engaging and involving as a character. And I recommend it to anyone who is interested in that kind of film, whether you've seen Guillermo's film or not, whether you read the novel. It's worth watching on its own. If you want to compare it to all the other versions, that's also a separate level of enjoyment. So I highly recommend picking up Nightmare Alley. I'm talking about the new version by Criterion. So for its age, the film is restored and looks really good, sounds good, has a bunch of extras I haven't even gotten into yet. So that's my recommendation.
If I want to do like a back-to-back watching of them, should I watch the old one first or the new one first?
I specifically, Nightmare Alley was on TCM streaming, and I waited because I wanted to see Guillermo's film. I didn't want that spoiled. So that's the order I watched them in. It's hard to answer because it depends why people are watching it.
What did you say, Ryan?
You're gonna know the story.
Okay.
If you watch the original, it's shorter, it's more concise, it's a little boiled down. Guillermo expanded the story a lot. He added other details that are not in the original, but I probably would recommend watching Guillermo just because it's new. I still haven't seen it in black and white, and I heard it's even better in black and white. So I guess my general recommendation: watch the new one first. It's streaming for free on Hulu and HBO Max, I think.
All right.
It's on Criterion.
And then go back and compare it because you're going to get a lot more surprises and twists in Guillermo's film that don't exist in the original, and that won't be effective if you watch the original first. So that's my recommendation. But hey, I'm not the boss. You do it if you watch both films. Both films, you're going to win anyway. So
I'm going to watch them at the same time. Two
Oh,
screens. Big
There
Ben,
you
what
go.
is your recommendation?
I'm going to go with another movie that rejuvenated a canceled show that was a cult classic and recommend Futurama, Bender's Big Score. Every time I watch this film, I can just feel the joy that the creators felt being able to return to a project that they love so much. Hearing that theme song again in an extended way with the caption, "It just won't stay dead," is one of my absolute favorite moments that this fandom has ever produced. And this particular movie is just about as perfect an encapsulation of all the characters and the feel of the entire show that both celebrated sci-fi as much as it lampooned it as I can imagine. And that prophetic caption remains true to this day as word is circling the interwebs that Futurama is due for yet another revival on Hulu. Here's hoping that they don't screw that up, but even if they do, I still have my favorite moments from its original 3 runs to fall back on.
Yeah, if they can get John DiMaggio back in. Get Joe DiMaggio in too.
Wait.
If they can get John DiMaggio.
They can't get John. They should get Joe.
I agree.
I don't know what Joe
Belushi effect.
DiMaggio's agent is asking for. It's probably less than John's, but I hear
He's got to
Joe
just
was
not don't have a famous last name because I'm gonna do that all the time. But yeah, and similar to the Star Trek movies, the Futurama movies have the same thing where only every other one is all that good. So.
See, that's another thing that the motion picture invented. So you got to thank it for that.
Schlenzo, what's your recommendation?
You know, I'm glad we're talking about that because look, we had the love for the motion picture. We had the love for Insurrection. I'm going to up the ante by recommending Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock.
That's
you know,
cheating.
this one often gets thrown into that category just because it's so easy to say the odd ones are bad. But there's a lot of value in their search for Spock, even though it is based around crazy space magic that doesn't make any sense. But you have Christopher Lloyd as a fantastic turn, as a Klingon. The whole crew is at full pomp, as Jeremy would say. And it's just a lot. It's a fun Star Trek movie.
Not Jeremy.
You know. Oh yeah,
Simon.
yeah, absolutely.
Simon would say pomp.
Was Simon the one saying full pomp?
Yes.
Man, we have so many Brits on the show. And oh well. So there you go. Yeah, you're right though. That was Simon who said full pomp. We'll edit that out. Or maybe
no, I won't. If I have to keep my Joe DiMaggio thing in, you have to keep your fuck up too. So.
All right. Well, then we'll keep there. And Search for Spock directed
at full pomp every 5 minutes just so he can't edit it out. I'm
so
going to do it while you're talking so you can't even flip it.
Full pomp.
Exactly. Absolutely. No, but Star Trek 3, I think it's a lot of fun. It deserves a day in court. I will take on any and all challengers.
So if 3's not bad and 1's not bad, so the only 5 is bad and it's sunk all the other odds.
I think 5 has sunk. Now, here's the thing. 3's not as strong as 2, 4, and 6. I think it is that 2, 4, and 6 are just so good. Yeah, that's where I come down on it.
All right. Fair enough.
Because I don't even think Generations is that bad either. And that would be lumped in there as well.
Yeah, I think I would argue that 3 gets a ding because it doesn't have Spock in it.
Well, not till the end.
I know, but my point is that he is obviously one of the two main draws of Trek fandom, and it's like, well, he's directed the film, but the character's not in it, and I just think it makes it weaker compared to 4. But there, as you mentioned, first of all, just Christopher alone, there are many parts of 3 that I like better than 4.
Yeah, and it's got some good action as well.
And so it's like, I really, 1 isn't the best, but it's far from the worst. And then you start getting the next generation films, and it just, if you want some examples of bad stuff, 5 onward is a good place to look.
Except for Undiscovered Country, which is easily the
All
best.
All right, Ryan, what is your recommendation?
My point was, it's not one of the next generation.
No, Ryan.
Oh, I can actually talk now?
Please.
This week I'm recommending a recent release that actually has some connection to this week's case, and it's called Jackass Forever. I adore this series, even if it's just an excuse for grown men to mutilate each other's balls, and although the 4th installment might be my least favorite of the bunch, it's tough to improve on Jackass 3D, it's still better than 95% of the comedies being made today. Jackass Forever will probably still be in theaters when this episode drops, so if you feel safe, go check it out.
I've heard some people say that it's maybe not their favorite one, but it's up there.
I think the problem is it doesn't have Spock in it. I think
that's the problem. Is they're searching Bam Margera the whole time, and they can't ever find Bam.
Paramount will never learn.
But yeah, no, I've heard good things about Jackass. I kind of want to see it, but we'll see if I end up trekking out into the theater to see it.
I like the 1940s version with Tyrone Power much better than this.
Oh yes. That would be great.
Of course.
So I'll send us on home. Full pomp. Our film this week was about an enormous celestial body threatening all life on Earth. And so this week I'm going to recommend 2021's Don't Look Up, directed by Adam McKay. It tells the story of Earth's imminent destruction at the hands of a comet and the collective denial surrounding the gravity of the event. The reviews I've seen have been solidly mixed, and at the center of that seems to be
solidly mixed.
And it's at the center of that seems to be the film's heavy-handed messaging. But I must have missed the memo that says comedy and satire have to be subtle to be effective. Because satire. Because I thought the over-the-top absurdity was the key to the film's humor. Are the events of this film likely to occur in real life? Probably not. But anyone can see the parallels between the frustrating happenings in the film and those unfolding all around us in real time, just exaggerated a little. Probably not as exaggerated as we'd like to think. It was also recently nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture, to much fuss. Although I do have to agree that I'm not sure it deserves an honor over, say, Pig or Titan. But I guess you should see it and decide that for yourself. Don't Look Up is currently streaming on Netflix. Support your local library.
Close cover before striking.
Exactly.
Hey, Maynard, can we say that the
engines are improperly calibrated and you could put like a weird echo on us for the closing of the show?
No.
I can still say, well, given all she's got, Captain.
You can do that. I think.
Can you say that as Scotty now?
Unless it's protected.
No, I can only do the bailiff.
That's the bailiff. He is not Scotty. He is an intellectually distinct entity.
He certainly is.
Intellectually distinct. And with that, we're all out of show for this week. But we want to thank our guest, Scott Weitz, for joining us. Thank you very much, Scott.
It's been my pleasure as always.
We love having you back. And we will have you back in full pomp very soon.
Full pomp.
And we hope everyone will join us as well as the Reels of Justice
keep turning. Count it.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.